Thank you all so much for joining us for today's BU Professional Development webinar. Simple ways you and your team can avoid pandemic fatigue and improve mental health. My name is Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Career Programs team and the BU Office of Alumni Relations. And today's webinar is sponsored by the Boston University Alumni Association and is offered to our 346,000 alumni around the globe and all of our current students. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals, and we aim to do this by providing alumni and students with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. I know we have alumni and students joining us from some very far away places today. We have folks joining us from 9 countries around the world and I think at least 26 US states. Please know, everybody, that we really do appreciate your participation in this and every event and program that we offer. Before I introduce today's speaker, just 2 housekeeping notes from me. Today's presentation is being recorded, and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni Association website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions that you have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A box on Zoom, or you can just put them in the chat. We can do that too. But again, hover over your screen, select Q&A, you can type in your question, and we're going to try to save plenty of time at the end to get to those. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, 2-time Boston University alumna, Dr. Vyvyane Loh. Dr. Loh is board certified in obesity medicine and internal medicine. She graduated from the BU School of Medicine and trained at Newton Wellesley Hospital, where she also served as chief resident. Dr. Loh is the founder of Transform Alliance for Health, an established center of excellence in metabolic health and lifestyle medicine. Her fields of expertise include preventative medicine, nutrition, and stress management. She's run workshops around stress management and managing anxiety for her patients. She has also worked with healthcare workers on addressing their burnout and self-care. Her other achievements include choreography and writing. She was the recipient of the Bunting Radcliffe Fellowship in Fiction in 2006. She was a Guggenheim Fellow in Fiction in 2008 and was also shortlisted for the 2005 International Impact Award in Literature. Her diverse skills support her commitment to celebrating the full range of our humanity in an increasingly technological and disembodied world through art and the healing sciences. Dr. Loh, I am super excited to have you here today. I got a sneak peek at your presentation, and there's just some fascinating stuff in here, and your approach to medicine and health is a really interesting one. Thank you for being here. The floor is all yours if you want to go ahead and get your slide deck up, and then we'll be off and running.
All right, let me share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I just want to say I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I hope that this will turn out to be useful for the people attending. So from the very beginning of the pandemic, I knew that I would have to help my patients get through this. This was really unprecedented, and we'd never been through anything like this before together. And what I found really useful was some of my own past experiences. So before I really dive into it, I just want to share that I had the gift in my career of experiencing burnout very early in my career, pretty much 2 years after my training. And, at the time, I was extremely devastated, pretty lonely. Nobody was talking about burnout at the time. Nobody really was approaching mental health at the time, quite taboo subject. And I realized, oh my goodness, I'm fresh out of training. I've got to last that distance. And how am I going to do this? And if I can't manage this, I don't have a career in front of me. So I really had to piece everything together and figure it out for myself. I've learned a lot in the process. And then I've been lucky enough to be able to share some of that with my patients and also colleagues. So that's really where I'm coming from. And again, I hope people will find this helpful. Let me get to my first slide. All right, so let's just address this question of stress because it gets thrown about, that word, quite easily. I'm stressed today, just undergoing a lot of stress. Very simply, I just want us to recognize that stress is a state of arousal, right? And that could be good in some ways, or it could be bad. But we just think of it as a state of arousal, it can be very clarifying. So for example, if you see this gentleman here taking an exam, and that might be a little bit more of a negative stress, especially if you're concerned about, your grades and so forth, right? You have a new baby. I think people somewhere in the chat mentioned that, and Jeff as well. That's good stress, right? But it's stress nonetheless. It's still a state of arousal. You get a new job. That's good news, but that's still stress. So we're used to thinking of stress in the negative term, but better maybe to look at it as a state of arousal. And then how do we manage that state? Now, what about burnout? This is when we have the state of arousal become unremitting and you really don't have any relief and it's ongoing all the time. Sound familiar, right? After 2020, it's just like there's no end in sight. It's unremitting and we have a depletion of resources after a period of time. So you might have some reserve in terms of energy. You might have some reserves in terms of, how you can manage with your work teams and so forth. But if it's ongoing stress and it's unremitting, then we get to a point where we feel like we're completely out of resources. If we look at the Maslach Burnout Inventory, now this was used to kind of find a way to address what are the key things that come up to identify when someone is burnt out. And some of you may recognize some of these states in yourself. So one of them is emotional exhaustion, where you find that you're, at the end of the day, or even at the start of the day, you're just completely exhausted. There's just nothing left to give, right? Cynicism, depersonalization, meaning that you approach everything in your life, your work, maybe even your family members, your personal life, and you're cynical, you're depersonalized, you're not involved, right? You don't really engage. And you find yourself kind of acting and living at a very superficial level. And the sense of reduced personal accomplishment. So you feel like you've been on that rat wheel and you've been running really hard on the treadmill, but nothing really gets done. And you just feel like, okay, it's been day after day after day, and what have I done with all this time? So reduced personal accomplishment. And when we have these things show up in our lives, well, we can start to realize that we are either at or very close to burnout, right? So again, just to dive a little deeper into some of the things that might point to burnout, if you're feeling cynical and frustrated, if you're hypercritical or you've been told by family members, team members, that maybe you're hypercritical, you're asking too much, you notice you're disillusioned, you're impatient or irritable with others. So you just don't have the same level of patience that you had before. Don't really want to get to work. You've got 5 projects, don't really care. You go in, you clock in the time, but you're really unproductive and apathetic. Hard to focus. You have to deliver. There are deadlines, crucial, work that has to be done, but really hard to keep your mind on track. How about physical changes? And a lot of people are dealing with sleep issues. I will address that a little bit more in detail later on in the talk. But most people during the pandemic had issues with sleep, and it was either having difficulty falling asleep or sometimes just wanting to sleep all the time and not wanting to do anything else. Fatigue, chronic pain, those are also physical changes. And then we've noted that in the past year, people have turned to various addictions, or the addictions have worsened, right? Whatever they may be, to a substance. So it could be alcohol or medication, or to a behavior, which might be, antisocial, gambling, anything like that, right? Now, interestingly, when we look at the causes of burnout, here are some, common causes of burnout. But I want to emphasize the main one is going to be that number 1, okay, low control, low perceived sense of control. And I did see that in the chat earlier. The sense of, I feel like I can't control, I don't know what's going to happen, uncertainty, right? So when people express anxiety over uncertainty, really they're talking about having a perceived low sense of control of what's going on in their lives. And in the workplace, Employees will often feel like they don't have control. They're just told it's a trickle down thing, top down. I have to do X, Y, Z. There are no choices and it doesn't really matter, right? Coupled with that then is low purpose and low meaning. Does this really matter, right? If I churn out another project, if I just, clock in the time, does it really matter? Now, I also saw loneliness and isolation, and that was huge in the past year, right? This is because obviously with social distancing, we couldn't do the things we were used to doing. So being for many people alone, or even when you're at home and you have family members, right? We realize our world is bigger than just our individual family units, and that the community support through other family, extended family members and friends and so forth were really important. Dysfunctional homework social dynamics. This was a big one right at the beginning because we'd never done this before, and suddenly everyone is doing remote work. And what does that really mean? We had to redefine that, and sometimes we did it really poorly. So really wasn't defined at all. It was just this patchwork of make it happen, make it work. And then over time, it becomes dysfunctional because it's not thought through, it's not planned. Financial and job insecurity. So someone else in the chat mentioned difficulty in looking for a job. And that certainly, these practical demands on your life can cause burnout. Work demands, whether it's over or under production. So if you're leading a team, and I think with remote working, a lot of the issues are, you don't see your team members. So we keep piling on the work, and it's a way to manage our own anxiety and to reassure us that something's getting done because I can't see the people in front of me, right? So maybe we're actually over demanding in terms of work. It could also be underproduction, where it's the other way around, where you say, well, I don't want to stress people out too much, so we'll just dial everything down. Or because of the economy, there's not a lot going on, so we dial everything down. And that underproduction too, if you're sitting at home, you're lonely, you're isolated, right? Low sense of control, low purpose, low meaning, that underproduction can also be not very helpful at times. What I want to point out first and foremost is that stress, we often think of it as mental, but it is a physical state. In fact, it is one of the most physiologically measurable states in your body. We can measure it by looking at your blood pressure. We can measure it by looking at your heart rate, for example, right? And we're going to talk about some of these things. So it is a physical state. It's physiologic. It's happening in your body. It's not just in your head. Now, at some point, some of it may start in your head, but it really doesn't matter because your body does experience it. So let's get to this autonomic nervous system to understand the state of arousal a little bit more, because then later on, some of the strategies we're going to employ will be easier for you to understand. So the autonomic nervous system, our nervous system, is composed of two branches broadly. We call it the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. That sympathetic nervous system you have often heard of as the fight or flight system. So if a saber-toothed tiger comes in your path, you're either going to run, which I highly recommend, or try to fight the saber-toothed tiger. And I don't know, I don't have a lot of hopes for that one, but you're going to choose one or the other depending on your situation. And you're going to make these neurotransmitters like adrenaline, or otherwise known as epinephrine, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, right? So that's your fight or flight system. We also have the parasympathetic nervous system, and this is actually your rest and digest system, because we need a balance in our bodies. You can't be on all the time. You need an off switch. And so we have that parasympathetic nervous system for that rest and digest function. Now, so we have this balance between on switch and off switch, but if the stress doesn't go away and you're at home, the kids are at home, you're trying to mind the kids, you're trying to keep them occupied and out of trouble. You know, you've been working around the clock, you're staring into a screen for the 50th meeting of the day, you know, and this is on and on and on. What happens when that doesn't go away? Well, you then get to a state of depletion, a physical state of depletion. It's not just in your mind. And this is a part that I really want you to understand, that now your body is experiencing a state of depletion. So first and foremost, here are some very practical tips that I had my patients work on. Because right at the start of the pandemic, realizing that everything was changing, I had to help them get a sense of normalcy, get a sense of routine, right? So one thing for yourself, which is really important if you haven't done it already, and definitely for your team, is to establish routines. So, you know, whether it is a standard 20-minute meeting at a certain time in the day, you know, or a certain workflow, you want to establish that for your team, for yourself, for your kids. That was one of the things I said to my patients right off the bat. All right, make sure your kids have a routine, because I could imagine the first thing that's going to happen is we sleep in, we watch TV at random times of the day, and then, you know, everything goes out the window. So that routine is really important. I encourage people to actually write it down, not just for yourself, your kids, but also your team members. Really make a formal sense of routine and schedule. Now, the next thing I had my patients do was to have defined work areas. And I said, I don't care if you're in a studio apartment, you find a corner, you get some masking tape, and you tape, you know, a little square where your desk is, and you have an imaginary door. And when you're done at work, I want you to go out that door, close it, lock it, and don't go back in that area, because, you know, we need a sense of locale where, okay, this is where work is done, and it doesn't leak out into other areas in your home. So having a defined work area, no matter how small, you can use a little curtain to block it off. The masking tape works, whatever it is, make sure that's where you do work, and you have to really keep to that. So don't let it spill out into, you know, the dining room, into the living room. Okay, keep it contained. Limit your work hours and keep those boundaries. Now, this is easier said than done. This was one of the main things that happened when people first transitioned to remote working. It's just kind of bled into the rest of their lives, right? Just kind of seeped in, and it seemed never ending. And that's because, again, we didn't establish those routines. So establishing those work hours, whether it's 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock, whatever it might be that works for you, you have that in the schedule. If you are leading a team, remember, one of the big things that will cause burnout is loss of control, right, for your team. So my big suggestion, if you are leading a team here, is to have blocks that people can sign up or opt for, work hours in different blocks. Because given all the shift in our routines, some people, because of childcare or other obligations, you know, maybe they're taking care of an elderly parent, you know, their work hours are going to shift. So you can give them, you know, if you want to work starting at 7 in the morning, so an earlier shift, right? And do your 8 hours in that block. Or if you want a later shift, just even giving people those options on your team and giving them permission so that they can take care of what they need to do and then get to work, for, you know, or the other way around. That sense of control is really important. So you limit the hours, you want to keep those boundaries, but also maybe offer some, you know, option there for people. So there's a little bit of a sense of control. And then you want to encourage these active breaks where, you know, get people to move around. And that might just be maybe 2 minutes before a meeting, or before you actually start the meeting, getting everyone to stand up and just march on the spot. Another thing might be, you might want to start a Fitbit challenge. So have people, you know, see if they can get in X number of steps per day. Just, you know, a little bit of camaraderie, a little bit of mild competition. Or you could team people up For team building, I saw someone there was interested in team building. So having different teams and then having them compete in terms of their steps. So you also maybe want to physically put in the schedule when we are establishing the routine, put an active break. And in that time, you might just have an online walking group where people, if they want to, that's just an option. But when you do that, people may or may not sign up. What you're actually doing is giving them permission, right? You're saying this is something that's healthy and you really should be doing it. So rather than just say, oh, you know what, stand up one, you really have to make it okay for people to do that. And the best thing is to start by doing it yourself. We have a rule here at Transform, and that is never ask someone to do something you're not willing to do yourself. So, if I'm not doing it, I don't ask my patient to do it. That's just not fair, right? If I can't do it because I'm too busy, well, you know what? My patient is very busy too, right? If I can't figure it out in my busy day, then my patient's not going to figure out what help am I to that person, right? So you might want to start with yourself. And when you do it, especially if you're leading a team, that gives other people permission to do that. Now, there are other basic health strategies. I don't want to get too deep into them, but they do involve nutrition, your level of activity, and your sleep. And basically, all these things are going to impact the state of inflammation in your body. Again, don't want to go too in depth here, but what we're saying is that if you have poor nutrition, low levels of activity, and poor rest, poor sleep, then we make a lot of these free radicals in our bodies. And these free radicals are substances that are highly unstable, highly reactive, and they do a lot of damage to cells, causing a lot of cell death. And these unstable molecules, we call them reactive oxygen species, or ROS, but they can cause damage to fats and proteins, and we're made of proteins in our body. They cause damage to DNA and RNA, aging, cognitive dysfunction, all right, cancer, huge load on inflammation. And as you know, COVID-19 is a highly inflammatory state. So we don't want to already be in a state of inflammation, and that's going to make things worse. So we do want to decrease the formation of these free radicals, and we do that by watching the nutrition, avoiding processed foods. Right at the start of the pandemic, I noted that all the baking supplies were going really quickly, and I was going, I don't think that's a strategy, right? Now we know that if you have diabetes, you don't even have to have diabetes. If your blood sugar is high, right, upon admission to the hospital, you're likely to do worse with COVID-19, just because your blood sugar is high and you're not diabetic, right? So we want to avoid processed foods and sugar. These things do cause inflammation. And one quick way to think about it, just to make it simple for everyone, focus on foods of one ingredient. So chicken, one ingredient. Broccoli. Now you can put all these individual ingredients together to make a meal, but the less processed, the better. Activity we talked about, just even getting out there and walking, standing up on your phone calls and so forth. Sleep is highly important to your immune function and decreasing that inflammatory state. The problem is because of the anxiety, the uncertainty, people are struggling with sleep. So I have some suggestions for that a little later on. Now, you often hear, okay, to manage your stress, okay, you should be meditating, maybe do some yoga and so forth. These are all great things. I do recommend that, and we do help our patients with that. But if you're one of these people who maybe find it really hard, you've never done meditation before, it's hard to even sit for a minute, you have racing thoughts, the anxiety is so great, you can't calm yourself down, then we need a bridge. Right? We need something that's practical that we can use right now, that can give you relief now. And when we can calm ourselves now, then we can work on those longer term strategies. So today, I'm just going to focus on these short-term strategies, and they work for yourself, your friends and family. I want to include children because a lot of you have kids at home, and also your work teams. So going back to the sympathetic, parasympathetic, we have one way to think about it is if you're driving a car, your sympathetic nervous system is the accelerator. your parasympathetic nervous system is going to be the brake system, right? And you don't want to drive a car without the brakes or without the accelerator. You got to have both. Now, your heart rate is one way to look at how aroused you are, right? And normally you should be around 60 to 100 beats per minute. If you're aroused, you have a little bit more stress, the accelerator is on, you're going to have a faster heart rate, slower, then your brake is working, all right? Now, we look at this RR interval, and we don't have to get into detail here, but this is an EKG, and we measure the peaks that you see here. We call that the RR interval. Most people think of your heart rate as being very regular, like a metronome. And it is regular, but it really shouldn't be like a metronome. There should be some variation within that variability, okay? And the way I describe it is like when you're driving in the city. When you're driving in the city, you need to actually pay attention and use both pedals quite frequently when you're driving, right? Because you're driving, you see some kids on the corner, so maybe a little bit on the brake to slow down. You don't know if they're going to rush out, right? And then it's a clear street, you know, everything's clear. You might be putting your foot down on the accelerator a bit more. So you're always navigating those two pedals when you're driving. You don't want to just have one. If you have a very regular heartbeat, then basically you only have one pedal. I bring this up, it's called Takatsubo Cardiomyopathy or broken heart cardiomyopathy, again, to emphasize that this is not in your head and this is a physical state, all right? And what this is damage to the heart caused by some great stress. Takatsubo is the Japanese word for this kind of an urn. I think they use it to catch octopus in. And the reason it's called Takatsubo cardiomyopathy is because when you're under great stress, in some cases, you know, the heart gets deformed by the stress and takes on the shape that looks like this urn, okay? So it might be that someone has lost someone, you know, so in the state of grief, and that has occurred to a lot of people in the last year. It could be also great financial stress. There have been some case histories that I looked at where people underwent great financial stress, and that caused this condition in the patient. And it's expressed just like a heart attack. So you have chest pain, chest pressure, you can't breathe, right? And that's because, again, the stress has caused the heart to remodel its shape. It can't properly beat and send out blood to all parts of your body. So now in that state, right, it's a compromised state for you. And you get the chest pain and so forth, right? And people have to be hospitalized with this condition. So when we talk about stress, please, again, it's not just in your head, it's very physical. And if this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. Now, this luckily is a reversible state, as you can see here, but it does take some time, and we do have to manage that stress and get that person through. So back to the driving with both pedals on, we have something called heart rate variability. And that is, again, an indication that you're using both the accelerator and the brake pedal, right? That, you know, sometimes you're going a little bit faster, sometimes a little bit slower, and we should have a little bit of variability or HRV. We know that within a certain range, higher HRV is indicative that that brake system is working. So if you don't have that variability, you're driving without the brakes, not a good state. And if you don't have that heart rate variability, low heart rate variability, so it's very much like a metronome, then you have no parasympathetic or rest and digest input, no off switch. And HRV and health are quite well associated. The lower the variability, that means no brake, that's associated with anxiety and depression. The higher HRV you have within a certain range, the more resilient. So I saw someone talk about building resilience. So this is one thing to address if we want to build resilience. Now, if you look at patients with depression, they actually tend to have lower HRV, less variability, less brake. And if you give them antidepressant therapy, then the HRV improves and the severity of symptoms will decrease. So we can actually see that clear association. The lower the HRV, again, no breaks, you have increased risk of death from all causes, heart disease, cancer, whatever you have. Okay, so the lower that heart rate variability, it's an indication you have no off switch. That car engine keeps going on, and it will burn out, right? So this heart rate variability is really important. Now, last I checked, you can't really look at your heart. I mean, I've tried, it doesn't work, and go, okay, come on now, give me some variability, right? So let's think about some ways that we can bring that heart rate variability to ourselves and to our family members, let's say, all right? The thing is, physiologically, it turns out, luckily, that, we can modulate our heart rate variability with our breathing. When we inhale, physiologically, your heart rate will increase, right? And when you exhale, when you breathe out, it actually decreases. We call this in the medical field, respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It is the healthiest rhythm to have on the EKG strip. This is what we look for as a sign of health. We want to see that slight increase in the heart rate and then a decrease with the inhalation and exhalation. Knowing that, we can actually now get to the heart rate variability through our breath. So there's something called resonance frequency breathing. And this is using the diaphragm to breathe. And you're using your diaphragm when your belly rises and falls during your breath. Okay, so if you're just breathing from your chest, the belly isn't moving. We have to involve the diaphragm, so we have to have that belly go up and down. That's slow diaphragmatic breathing. But we want to breathe at a certain rate. Why? Because physiologically, this is the magic that happens in your body, right? When you breathe at a certain rate, that is going to give you optimal heart rate variability. It's a physiologic process. That breath is paired to that heart rate variability. We call that resonance frequency breathing, and it turns out it's somewhere in the range of 4.5 to 7 breaths per minute, okay? And actually, I'll give you a tip. Just aim for 6 breaths a minute. There's some slight variation depending on how tall you are and so forth, but for most people, 6 breaths a minute is going to do it. Give you that nice HRV. So here is an example, and this is from a volunteer, and we measured it on what we call the HeartMath M-Wave Pro, and it helps us look at the heart rate variability. So I want you to focus on this green area, and in the green area, the higher up you go, the more heart rate variability you have, okay? So that's good, right? And then the lower you go, if you go into the blue or in the red, then that's not good because you have less heart rate variability. So we gave the subject some time to just kind of, get used to all of this. And at this point, an instruction was given to the subject to think of a very happy and good memory. Okay. And you can see with that good thought or good memory, up when that heart rate variability stayed up. Pretty impressive, got very high. At this point, the instruction was given to now bring up a bad memory, something that was really, really stressful and negative for the person. And you can see, like magic, plummeted, right? That HRV plummeted. Okay. At this point, we said, now go back to the good memory. Okay, what happened? Go back to the good memory and nothing happened. Stayed low, stayed low, stayed low, stayed low, plummeted, went into the red. What happened there? Later, when we talked to the subject, she said, Dr. Loh, I couldn't unhook from the bad memory. And some of you, I know, will be able to relate to that. When you get a thought that's negative, right? And now you're just ruminating, and it's really hard to unhook. And that's where she was. She had the good thought, then she had the bad thought, and we said, now go back to the good thought. She could not unhook, right? So she stayed down here, and she stayed down here. She tried. What happened here? We simply said, okay, forget about trying to access that good memory. Just go to your resonant breathing. All she did was breathe. Up that went. Okay, she had to focus, she lost focus a little bit, but you can see just accessing the resonant breath brought her right back up. So this is a clear demonstration that when you cannot unhook from those negative thoughts, you can resort to your own physiology, and you're going to do that resonant breathing. And we know that when you increase the HRV, your blood pressure decreases, all measures of stress will decrease as well. So 6 breaths a minute, what does that translate into? That translates into a 5-second inhale, a 5-second exhale, right? So your full breath, inhale and exhalation is 10 seconds. And you have 60 seconds in a minute, right? So you're gonna get to that 6 breaths. So what you can do is just inhale for 5 seconds and exhale for 5 seconds when you cannot unhook from those negative thoughts, right? This works just because your body, if you do that kind of breathing, your heart rate will follow. So you can teach that to your kids. You can teach that to your team members. Probably can't teach that to your dog, but you could try, right? But, accessing the inhale for 5 seconds, exhale for 5 seconds. I want to point out this is distinct from relaxation because what we're doing is syncing the breath, the heart, and the brain, and that helps us access the parasympathetic nervous system. And this will increase that heart rate variability. So relaxation is fine, but again, when you have all those negative thoughts you can't unhook from, you're going to have a bridge, a short-term strategy. The other thing I love about this is you can do this at any point in your day and nobody needs to know. So you're in that Zoom meeting, your boss is saying something, your blood pressure is rising, you don't quite like it, you're smiling. You can just breathe and nobody will know that you're inhaling for 5, exhaling for 5, right? So again, your eyes are open. You don't have to sit there and close your eyes or find a quiet space to meditate. That at some point will be useful, but right in the interim, you can access the resonance frequency breathing. As I said, 6 breaths a minute. Now, here's a little tip. If you get to 6 breaths a minute, 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale, right? And you're pretty good at that. One thing you can try to do is experiment with the ratio between inhale and exhale. Keeping the 10 seconds. What if you inhaled for 4 seconds and exhaled for 6? Now remember, on the exhale, what happens? Heart rate drops. Okay, that's the phase where your heart rate is going to go lower. So if you extend the exhale, you're going to have more of that dropping in the heart rate, which will calm you down. Okay, so if you're good at that, you could try inhale for 3, exhale for 7. We're still in that 10-second phase, but we've kind of experimented with the ratio and we're prolonging the exhalation, right? So we have more time for the heart rate to drop. Now, one of my pet peeves when someone is anxious or having an anxiety attack, people around them mean to be helpful. And I often hear them say, take a deep breath. And the patient, poor thing, is going, and you're like, take a deep breath, right? That is never helpful. When someone is anxious, please do not say that to them, okay? What you want them to do is breathe out long and hard. So you should be saying, okay, give me a big sigh. And you want them to go, as long as possible. No, longer sigh. Because when they do that sigh, they're dropping their heart rate, okay? Big, long sigh. And you've seen this when someone is sobbing uncontrollably, right? And then suddenly there's this, right? That phase is the body trying to regulate itself, okay? So you can extend the exhalation and that might be helpful. And then very quickly, to manage screen time, because we're always staring at the screen, the more we can be in nature, that impact of greenery, the color green is actually very relaxing. So even having potted plants, right? If you can't even have that, I would say, visualization can be very helpful. So visualizing a scene in nature, so closing your eyes and spending 5-10 minutes visualizing that green, that's good for you, that's good for the kids, that's good for your team. And then this convergent versus divergent vision. So anytime we are focused on something like a screen, right, then we're using convergent vision, which is actually a sympathetic response. We narrow the field of focus and we're right here, tunnel vision, okay, because we're focused. So again, that's sympathetic, your fight or flight. If we want to get to rest and digest, we need the divergent vision. And that means we have to expand the visual field. So really, if you can look away or just look a little bit above, you're in that Zoom meeting, right? So you look a little bit above the screen, and what you want to do is kind of see how much of the periphery of the room you can take in, and let your gaze just kind of spread out, right? And if you can include top and bottom, that would be good. But most importantly, laterally, you want to have that vision just diverge out to see as much of the sides of the room as possible. And, I'm doing it right now. And I hope to all of you, I'm just staring at the screen. That's what your boss will see, right? So you can try that in that moment as well, especially when you're getting a lot of screen fatigue. And that's something to teach your kids as well. Just very quickly, if people want to know more, we do a lot of workshops, lectures, and coaching for different teams. My focus and my expertise is on metabolic health. So we do have programs where we address nutrition, sleep, activity, preventive health, longevity, and that's the contact information if you want to reach us. But I'm eager to see what questions you may have and how I can help. So let me stop sharing and go back to Jeff.
You shared your contact info for Transform Health. I want everybody to know that we'll share that in a follow-up email probably tomorrow or Monday. Dr. Loh, this is such interesting stuff, for lack of a better term. I think we've all been hearing about self-care and the importance of focused breathing and those kinds of things, but the science that you've shared behind that today was really kind of almost like an awakening for me. So I really appreciate it. We've got a lot of people weighing in the chat that they're really thankful that they attended today. Getting back to the breathing, Michelle's wondering, during the inhale and the exhale, does it matter if you're breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth? Do you have tips on that?
Okay, in the end, it's not going to matter, but I prefer through the nose, okay, because nose breathing is, to me, again, healthier. So if you can try to do it through your nose, if you can't, it's fine. Especially if someone's really anxious and you want them to do that long sigh, sometimes it helps to just get them to exhale through the mouth and make this long sigh and go, right? So you want that because you want to extend that exhalation, so whatever it takes.
Great. So much of your presentation today was about kind of the impact of depression. And Mina's wondering, there's this terrible loop about depression, all those things that you mentioned around eating better, adding more activity to your schedule, getting better sleep. With depression, all of those things are 10 times harder to do. So when you're working with a patient who's really depressed, how do you encourage them to sort of break out of and try to add those things into their life?
Yeah, so one thing I want to first emphasize is that nowadays, the research is pointing towards inflammation in the brain, right? And how that's associated very highly with depression, with anxiety. When you see depression, you basically have an inflamed brain. When you see, a lot of anxiety, you have an inflamed brain. So we really do have to address the things that are increasing inflammation. And I know it's hard, but getting to the basics. So, the first thing is actually practicing the breathing a few times a day, because that helps immediately with emotional regulation. How long? My recommendation is a minimum of 10 minutes twice a day. Okay, so you got to think about this as training. For you go to the gym, you work out, you're really training your emotional regulation and resilience here. It can be trained, folks. It really can be. But now you're going to invest that 10 minutes. In the beginning, if it's once a day, great. But let's try to get it to 10 minutes twice a day. Do it with the kids. Sit down and say, okay, it's our breathing time, right? Because it will help them build resilience, really important for them in this time as well. So let's start there. And once we have more emotional regulation, and then you can bring it into situations. So someone is talking to you and you're finding yourself getting upset. Now you learn to do it in the moment, eyes open. You can still regulate the breath, right? That again builds resilience. So these small pieces, and eventually getting to the other aspects, nutrition, sleep, and so forth.
It's interesting. It's such a paradox. It seems so simple, like all we're doing is talking about breathing, but it is so hard for so many people to build these habits and these practices in. And Mike is one of them. You know, Mike has mentioned that he works in one of those 24/7, 365-day-a-year businesses. Can you talk a little bit more about the advice you give your patients about really establishing boundaries when you have one of those careers that's just, you know, Mike has mentioned that he's potentially on call all day, every day. What does Mike do?
Yeah. Okay. So, Mike, and if you're leading a team, remember establishing routines, you might want to put in those breathing routines and say, in the morning, we have a 10-minute breathing session. So everybody, anyone who wants to join, we can, and you give permission for that. And you peg that in the schedule. So there's a place for people to go to, right? So you can do that for yourself in terms of establishing the boundaries. What we do with our patients is we take them through a whole series of things such as values alignment, and we help them, you know, think about their belief systems. We help them look at their cognitive distortions, because a lot of times, you know, is it really important that I'm a physician, I'm a one-person doctor in my practice. Okay, so I don't really have another doctor that's covering me. So my coverage is 24/7. Now, I don't think that I have to be on 24/7. So when I have people tell me, you know, okay, I have to be on 24/7 because it's so important because this program might not work and so forth. I'm like, okay, but I'm dealing with someone might die and I don't feel that way, right? So there's a big difference in how we're thinking and how we're processing that. So looking at our thoughts, our cognitive distortions around our responsibilities, our values. So that's a bit of a longer process. And we're not really taught that, not in school, not anywhere else. So now we're left to kind of juggle all of this on our own, especially when there's no routine, there's no limits anywhere, right? So I would start with, again, establishing for yourself, what are the basics that you need to be healthy, to function? Because if you can't get out of bed, let's just say physically, you cannot get out of bed for some reason, it doesn't matter how much they need you at work, it's just not happening, right? So you're gonna have to ask yourself, well, you know, what do I really need to be able to function optimally at my job? And this is where, again, we talk about metabolic health. People ask me, well, what do you do? What's metabolic health? And I go, really, this is about managing energy in your body, right? And managing it for optimal performance. So if you're, you know, very high up, let's say in your company, or you have a very important job, a lot of times we think we don't have the time for self-care. And I'm like, you don't have the luxury of no self-care. You don't. The more important your job, the more of something, if you can't get out of bed for some reason, you're letting a lot of people down, right? So you better make sure you're at peak health so you can be at peak performance.
I want to remind folks that we are going to send out a recording of this. You talked some real specific details, Dr. Loh, and Emily's asking if you could maybe just revisit again what you were saying about expanding your view. I think it was convergent versus divergent vision. And if you could share that tip again about when you're in that meeting and what to do with your field of vision.
Okay, so we can all try this together. Don't do this in the meeting, but we're gonna practice together. So you put your fingers up in front of you and you're looking at two fingers, and that's convergent, right? Because you really focus on those two fingers. Now, I want you to keep your eyes on both fingers as you bring them apart. You still wanna look at both, not just one, both. Take them as far apart as you can and keep both in view. As far as you can, all the way to the periphery, that's divergent, right? When your eyes are keeping, you know, track of both fingers and they're way out on the sides and you can still kind of see them, that's divergent. So you can practice that at home, you can practice that with your kids. And then when you're in a meeting, one thing to do is to note something on this side of the room and note something on that side of the room. Let's say there's a potted plant on this side and then a door on this side. So what you want to do is be able to see the door and the potted plant at the same time, and you're staring at the screen, put a little smile on your face, no one will know. All right.
I love the idea that you're foundation of health, and that the organization you founded, Transform Alliance for Health, is about transforming sick care into health care. I have a bunch of folks. Dave is asking some questions, I think some real specific things about your practice. And Dave, I want to encourage everybody actually to follow up with Dr. Loh at Transform Alliance for Health. Visit their website, transform.afh.com. Dr. Loh, thank you so much for doing this today. It was really, I've been talking with some of the folks on my team, and a lot of us, it took a year, but we finally felt like we were hitting this wall. And so I know, at least for me and probably a lot of folks, BU folks around the world, this has been a tremendous help today. So thank you so much for doing this. You're welcome. It's transform dash hyphen. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. We're going to send out a link in the follow-up email, so everybody will have easy access. I want to thank all of our guests for participating today. You know, this topic of health is obviously important to careers, right? As Dr. Loh has been talking about. And I want to make sure people know that BU launched a new resource this year called BU Connects. This is our new online mentoring and networking platform. And it's a great way to advance your career as well. Alumni can, and I need to find my notes here. Alumni can find fellow grads in their industry with similar interests, leverage your professional network to finally, get introduced to those people that you should know. If you're a student, you can meet BU alumni who've been in your shoes and now who can maybe help open doors at their place of work. I want to give everybody a pro tip. You can sign in to BU Connects very easily using your LinkedIn profile, and that's going to allow you to copy a lot of your profile information over, and you can be up and running networking in just seconds. We have nearly 40 special interest and industry networking groups that you can join. Some really awesome stuff happening there. So sign up today, buconnects.com, and find, make some great connections. Like people like Dr. Loh. Dr. Loh, thank you again for doing this. This was really amazing. You're welcome. I had fun. I hope it was helpful. I definitely was. All right. I hope everybody has a great day or a great evening wherever you might be. Take care.